This video will introduce you to the basic movement patterns of resistance training and how to apply them to your workouts. Understanding the different movement patterns is a key component to putting together effective resistance training programs and getting great, rounded development. This video will focus around identifying the key lower body and upper body movement patterns and cover some basic considerations to building effective and ongoing exercise programs for years to come. Let's start with the lower body. The first movement pattern we will cover for the lower body is the squat pattern. As with all movement patterns, there is a large arsenal of exercises that we can utilize for the squat pattern. Whereas the squat pattern is quite effective in developing the lower body as a whole and some other stabilizing muscles such as the core and spinal erectors in some movements, its main goal and utility is to build positive adaptations to the anterior thigh, mainly quadricep muscle groups, and the gluteal muscles. The second movement pattern for the lower body is the hip hinge. The hip hinge has a large variety of exercises we can choose to get the job done as well. Before we cover the hip hinge, an important consideration when choosing an exercise for any movement pattern is to choose an exercise that suits your body. Unless the exercise is a requirement for you to reach your specific goal, you don't have to rely on it in your programming. This is especially true for hypertrophy. There are plenty of exercises to choose from that will be effective in building muscle. It's important to choose exercises that you enjoy and don't cause you any unnecessary pain and discomfort. Now back to the hip hinge. The main goal for the hip hinge movement pattern is to develop the posterior thigh, mainly hamstring muscle group and your gluteal muscles. It's important to note, however, that certain hip hinge movements like the deadlift or deadlift variations will also stimulate the back, spinal erectors and core muscles to some degree. The upper body movements have two general patterns, the push pattern and the pull pattern. These two patterns are further broken down into horizontal and vertical movements. Each movement pattern helps prioritize development in certain areas. Let's start with the horizontal push pattern. This movement pattern is great for developing the pectoral muscle group, your chest, and depending on the movement, often gets decent stimulation to the triceps and front delts. The vertical push movements serve the purpose of developing the deltoid muscle group, mainly anterior and medial delts, upper chest, upper traps, and triceps. Also, depending on the movement, they often recruit the core muscles and spinal erectors for balance and stabilization. Where it is a good idea to have a vertical push movement in your program to peak shoulder stimulation, it is not a necessity. You'll find you get decent stimulation to the deltoid muscle groups from pull movements and horizontal push movements. Now we will cover the pull patterns. These are used to develop the muscles of the back, biceps, and rear delts. Because of the anatomy of the back musculature, it is important to have a mix of both vertical pull movements like pull-ups and pull-downs, and horizontal pull movements like row variations. In order for the rounded and even development of the back muscle group, you should include at least one of each of the pull movement patterns in a program at any given time. Now that we are familiar with the movement patterns, how do we apply it to our training? A starting recommendation would be to include 1 to 2 movements from each of the movement patterns in your microcycle or training week and keep them there for several months, before swapping out these exercises for another movement of the same movement pattern, keeping it in place for another several months. The reason why we keep these exercises in our program for several months, despite the popular belief that changing exercises frequent is better for growth, is due to the nature of how the body learns, adapts, and grows with a new exercise. First, your body has to learn how to actually perform the movement. Recruit the right muscles, set up the neural pathways to signal the muscles to execute the movement, and generally develop the skill. This process takes some time. Once these foundations are set, only then do you see the muscles that you are targeting with the movement pattern receive enough stimulation to drive proper adaptation. They then ride this growth stimulus for several months before developing a resistance to the stimulus and slowing down adaptation. This is when it would be a good idea to swap the exercise for another in the same movement pattern to start the process again and to give the other movement time to resensitize to the stimulus. I hope this video has provided you with some insight into how to effectively program your training. Happy training! If you want to learn more about how to take control of your training and nutrition, feel free to check out our ebook store that is linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons.